It started like any other quiet Saturday morning. Jenna stood by the kitchen counter, sipping her coffee with one hand while scrolling through her phone with the other. The sun poured in through the blinds, casting golden strips across the tile floor, and for a moment, everything looked normal. Too normal. She told Tyler she'd be gone most of the day helping a friend move. Just like that, no details, no names, no invitation for further questions. She needs help packing boxes and hauling some stuff to storage. Shouldn't take more than a day, she said, already halfway out the door. Tyler looked up from his coffee, the words sounding fine on the surface, but somehow out of rhythm. He asked, "Which friend?" Jenna smiled. Not the soft, warm kind that used to melt him, but the kind that closed a door. "You don't know her. Just someone from the yoga group." That was it. She kissed his cheek quickly, grabbed her keys and left. No conversation, no eye contact. Her perfume lingered longer than she did. Tyler sat alone in the quiet house, the faint click of the door behind her still echoing in his ears. Something about the way she'd said it didn't sit right. Jenna was usually chatty, especially when she was doing something kind. She'd go on about what a mess the place was, or how ungrateful people could be when you offered to help. But this time, nothing. No complaints, no specifics, just a vague, disposable story with the kind of calm detachment people use when they want their words to be taken at face value. As the morning hours passed, Tyler couldn't focus. He tried reading, then folding laundry, then sorting through a stack of unopened mail on the kitchen table. But the silence in the house had shifted. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was loaded. Jenna had always been good at checking in when she was out. A text, a photo, a meme about moving day struggles. By noon, his phone was still dark. He didn't want to be the kind of husband who doubted without reason. That wasn't him. He trusted Jenna, or at least he had. But when intuition whispers loud enough, even the most grounded man begins to listen. Maybe it was the way she'd been smiling less lately, the way she brushed off affection, or how she always seemed to be somewhere else, even when she was right next to him. By 2 in the afternoon, Tyler's hand hovered over the Find My app on his phone. He opened it, telling himself it was just to make sure she was okay, not because he was suspicious, not because he was starting to believe she might be lying. The dot blinked to life. Jenna wasn't in any neighborhood he recognized as belonging to her yoga friends. She was across town, parked in front of a house he'd never seen, on a quiet street with no moving truck in sight. He stared at the screen, not breathing, as a hollow ache settled in his chest. Whatever Jenna was doing today, she wasn't moving boxes. She was moving on. The drive across town was long, but not in miles. It was long in seconds that ticked louder than the engine, in the way Tyler gripped the steering wheel tighter the closer he got to the blinking blue dot on his phone. He didn't know the neighborhood by heart, but the houses were familiar in a general way. Single-story homes with trimmed hedges and aging driveways. The kind of place where people left their porch lights on out of habit rather than fear. Quiet, ordinary, exactly where someone might go if they wanted to disappear in plain sight. Tyler parked at the end of the block. He didn't want to be seen. He didn't know what he was expecting or what he planned to do, only that he couldn't ignore the knot that had taken root in his gut and was tightening with every breath. For years he had trusted Jenna implicitly, never once scrolling through her phone or asking too many questions when she worked late. She had never given him a reason to doubt her. But now all he could feel was a subtle, cruel shift in the world they had built together. Like the foundation had quietly cracked while he wasn't looking. He stayed in the car for several minutes, pretending to check messages but really just stalling, unsure of what he would find or what he'd do if he found it. He could still turn around, tell himself this was all just a misunderstanding, a misread signal, a coincidence. But something deeper, almost primal, told him otherwise. Doubt wasn't just knocking, it had already let itself in. Eventually, he stepped out of the car, careful to keep his pace steady, casual. He didn't walk directly to the house where the blue dot rested. Instead, he circled the block once, slowly, pretending to look at house numbers as if he were a lost delivery driver. But he wasn't lost. He was exactly where fate had sent him. As he neared the house, he heard the faint echo of laughter drifting through an open upstairs window. It wasn't the sharp, nervous laugh Jenna gave at office parties or around his mother. It was relaxed, warm, too familiar. He quickened his step and cut across the street, eyes locked on the modest beige house with a wreath on the door and a car in the driveway he didn't recognize. A silver sedan, not Jenna's. But next to it, parked under the shade of a low tree, was her Camry. He walked past the house without stopping, only glancing at the front window for a moment. It was enough. Through the thin, sheer curtains, he could make out the shape of a woman sitting on a sofa, legs curled under her, a wine glass in hand. Her laugh, unfiltered and unguarded, rose again, and this time it was joined by a man's voice. Tyler didn't need to see his face. He already knew. This wasn't a friend. This wasn't Lisa. This was someone else entirely, a man Jenna had never mentioned, a man whose lap her legs now rested across with ease, as if this were something they'd done 100 times before. He felt the weight of it hit him, not all at once like a slap, but like a slow, suffocating pressure, building behind his ribs. He didn't move, didn't knock, didn't scream or confront. Instead, he stood there, memorizing the moment, burning it into his brain with terrifying clarity. The angle of her body, the tilt of her head as she smiled at something he'd never hear, the ease with which she betrayed the life they had built. And still, he didn't move. He turned away slowly, each step heavier than the last. He walked back to his car and sat behind the wheel in silence, not starting the engine right away. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Finally, a message from Jenna. Still packing, crazy day, might be late. Don't wait up. The lie was so casual, so confidently typed that it stunned him more than the scene he had just witnessed. He stared at it for a long time, letting the heartbreak settle into something colder. He didn't cry. He didn't rage. Instead, he felt a kind of hollowing, as though the center of him had quietly collapsed and left nothing but a shell behind. And in that silence, a new version of Tyler began to take shape, one that wasn't waiting for explanations anymore. One who would never again ignore the quiet voice that said, "Something's not right." Tyler didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed long after Jenna returned home, pretending to be half asleep, his back turned toward the faint creak of the door and the soft padding of her feet as she entered their bedroom. She moved with the casual calm of someone who believed their story had held, humming a low tune as she took off her earrings and set them gently on the dresser. He could hear the rustle of her jeans, the faint clink of the wine glass she'd brought with her from downstairs, the small, satisfied sigh as she slid beneath the covers beside him. He didn't turn around. Her body, warm and familiar, curled into the space they had shared for years, but for the first time in their marriage it felt foreign, like she didn't belong there anymore, like the person lying next to him was just wearing a version of his wife's skin, a costume carefully maintained. Tyler stared at the wall, the digital clock casting faint red numbers across the ceiling. 12:41 a.m. She shifted slightly behind him, and for a moment he thought she might confess something. Anything. Instead, she whispered, "Love you," her voice barely audible, laced with the sleepy ease of someone whose conscience was undisturbed. He didn't answer. When morning came, Jenna was already downstairs, making coffee like nothing had changed. She wore one of his t-shirts, her hair pulled up in a loose bun. She glanced at him over her mug with a lazy smile. "You slept like a rock," she said. "I didn't even hear you get up once." Tyler forced a nod, mumbling something about being exhausted from the week. His heart beat hard in his chest, but his face didn't betray a thing. He wasn't ready for confrontation, not yet. He needed to be sure, beyond the shadow of instinct, beyond the gut-tightening certainty that had followed him since yesterday. He needed to see it again, up close, undeniable. 2 days later, Jenna mentioned she'd be going out again. Another favor for the same friend, another packing session. This time she was careful to sprinkle in just enough details to sound convincing. "Lisa's got a couch, she needs help getting downstairs. I told her I'd stop by after yoga." Tyler nodded, calm, attentive, not giving her a reason to think anything had changed. He even smiled, asked her to bring home Thai for dinner. She kissed him and left with her usual breezy confidence. As soon as she was gone, Tyler grabbed his keys. This time, he didn't drive directly there. He waited, sat a few blocks away in his car with the engine off, his phone in his lap, watching her location update in real time. When it settled at the same address, he waited another 15 minutes. just enough time for her to feel safe. When he arrived, he parked further down the block and approached on foot, keeping close to the edge of the sidewalk. The curtains were open today. What he saw froze him in place. There was no couch being moved, no chaos, no stacked boxes or disassembled furniture, just Jenna, on the same couch, legs tucked neatly under her again, one arm draped across the shoulders of a man Tyler now had a clear look at. Late 30s or early 40s, stubble-lined jaw, short dark hair. Comfortable, confident, not looking over his shoulder once. The room was softly lit, a small candle flickering on the coffee table in front of them, 2 glasses of wine, both half full. Jenna laughed at something, and then she did something that shattered every remaining illusion Tyler had tried to preserve. She leaned in and kissed him. Not a quick, stolen kiss, not a guilty, hesitant one. It was slow, practiced, familiar, a kiss that came from repetition, from emotional intimacy, from love. Tyler stood frozen on the sidewalk, barely breathing. He didn't move, didn't make a sound. His hands were clenched at his sides, not in rage, but in restraint. The betrayal didn't erupt in him. It settled, like sediment in deep water, heavy, final. He turned and walked away again, slower this time, letting every detail etch itself into memory. The way her hand rested on the man's chest, the way she looked at him like he was the only person in the world, the soft intimacy in her smile. Those weren't the actions of a woman having an affair she regretted. That was someone who had already moved on emotionally. Someone who had decided what she wanted, and it wasn't Tyler. Back in his car, Tyler stared at the wheel for a long time. There were no more questions to ask, no more doubts to silence. The truth wasn't hidden anymore. It had been sitting on that couch, laughing, sipping wine, and kissing Jenna like she belonged to him. And maybe she did. What mattered now wasn't whether she loved someone else. It was what Tyler was going to do with the truth. Because once you've seen someone you love someone else, there's no unseeing it. There's only the choice, stay and pretend, or leave and heal. Tyler didn't drive home right away. He sat there, in the stillness of his own clarity, knowing, for the first time in a long time, exactly what he had to do. That night, Jenna walked into the house with a takeout bag in one hand and her purse slung carelessly over her shoulder, humming a tune Tyler didn't recognize. The scent of pad thai wafted through the hallway as she called out, "I got your usual, hope you're hungry." She kicked off her shoes by the door and walked into the kitchen, like nothing in her world had shifted. But Tyler had been waiting, not at the table, not on the couch, not pacing in anger, but in complete stillness, seated in his armchair with the lights dimmed and his phone face down on the coffee table. He didn't look at her when she entered. He just waited until the sound of her footsteps slowed, until her keys dropped into the bowl by the entryway with that familiar metallic clatter, until she was standing in the doorway of the living room, paper bag in hand, and a gentle smile playing on her lip. "You okay?" she asked lightly, her voice carrying that tone of subtle concern, the kind you use when you're trying to gauge someone's mood without alarming them. "You're quiet." Tyler finally looked up. "I hope the boxes didn't break," he said calmly. The lie did. The words hung in the air like smoke, slow to fade, impossible to ignore. For a second, Jenna didn't move. She blinked, eyes scanning his face for any sign that he was joking, that this was some strange moment of misplaced sarcasm. But the flatness in his tone, the weight behind his stare, said otherwise. She set the bag on the counter with trembling fingers, no longer humming. "What are you talking about?" she asked, but the question sounded mechanical, automatic. A reflex, not a defense. "I followed your location," Tyler replied, "twice. Once when I wasn't sure, and once when I was." Jenna's breath hitched, her lips parting slightly as if to speak, but nothing came. She crossed her arms, an unconscious gesture, more about protection than defiance. Her body tensed, but she didn't try to deny it, not really. She didn't ask him if he was mistaken, she didn't demand proof. And that told him everything. "Who is he?" Tyler asked, his voice still level. She hesitated, then finally whispered, "Marcus." The name was nothing to him, no face, no connection, just a syllable that now carried the weight of betrayal. "How long?" he asked. Jenna looked down, her fingers nervously fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. "A few months," she admitted. Tyler let out a breath through his nose, more disappointment than rage. Was I supposed to find out like this? Or were you planning to keep pretending? I didn't want to hurt you, she said, finally meeting his eyes. I didn't know how to end it. Then you shouldn't have started it, Tyler replied. Jenna took a step forward as if to close the distance between them, but Tyler raised a hand, not angrily, just enough to halt her. She stopped, mid-stride, the gesture freezing her in place. I'm not going to yell, he said quietly. I'm not going to ask you why, I already know the answer. You weren't happy, you found someone else who made you feel something you thought you'd lost. And instead of being honest, you wrapped it in a story about helping someone move and hoped I'd be too trusting to question it. I'm sorry, she whispered. He nodded slowly. I believe you. But sorry isn't going to fix it. There was a long silence between them, not the kind that begged to be filled, but the kind that made everything final. Jenna's face crumpled slightly, the strength she had worn for weeks beginning to unravel. She took another step forward, voice cracking. Are you going to leave? Tyler stood, the motion steady, not rushed. He walked past her without speaking and moved upstairs. When he came back down, he was carrying a duffel bag and a jacket. He didn't slam the door or raise his voice. He just paused on his way out, standing by the threshold. I'm not leaving, he said finally. I'm done. There's a difference. Jenna stared at him, her mouth trembling, as if 1,000 excuses and apologies were fighting to escape, but none did. She simply stood there in the kitchen, next to a bag of food meant for two, while the man she'd once built a life with walked away from it. Tyler didn't look back. Behind him, Jenna was left with a silence she could no longer hide behind, and a house that felt far too large for someone who had just made herself small, with a single choice. The first night without Jenna felt strangely weightless. Tyler stayed at a modest hotel off the highway, the kind of place with stale coffee and polite silence, where no one asked questions and the walls were thin enough to remind you that you weren't really alone. He didn't unpack, just set the duffel bag in the corner and sat on the bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling until the sun crept in. For the first time in years, there was no need to check in with anyone, no messages to send, no dinners to plan. The quiet was disorienting, but also honest. It didn't lie to him the way Jenna had. She called once, just once. It was 3 days after he walked out. Her name lit up his phone and he stared at it until it went dark again. No voicemail, no text, just a signal, a tether trying to pull him back, one he had already severed. He didn't answer, not out of spite, but because there was nothing left to say that would change what had already been done. Jenna, for her part, stayed in the house. She went through the motions, moving from room to room as if routine could somehow patch the hole she'd torn in her life. The Camry stayed parked, the wine glasses went untouched, and Marcus, he didn't last. 2 weeks after Tyler's departure, Marcus ghosted her. He stopped responding to messages, didn't return calls. When Jenna finally drove to his place, she found a new woman there, a stranger who opened the door with polite confusion. Marcus had vanished, in every way that mattered. Jenna was alone, and unlike Tyler, she hadn't chosen it. The weight of her mistake came crashing in slowly, during the quiet dinners eaten alone, in the double bed that suddenly felt vast and cold, in the unanswered calls to the man who had once memorized the way she took her coffee. Regret didn't come as a flood, it arrived as a drip. Every moment she used to share now echoed with the absence of what she'd given up. Tyler, meanwhile, didn't crumble. He didn't seek revenge. He didn't rant to friends or post bitter reflections online. Instead, he built a new rhythm. Small, quiet routines that didn't require anyone else. Early morning walks, reading at cafes, driving with no destination, just to remember that the world outside his grief was still moving. He didn't look for someone new. He wasn't ready for that, and he knew it. But he began reconnecting with pieces of himself he hadn't noticed were missing. The things that had dulled during years of compromise, softened beneath the weight of a marriage that had stopped being honest long before he realized it. When people asked what happened, he simply said, "It ended." Not with hate, not with rage, just with clarity. And that, more than anything, gave him peace. Months later, Jenna sent one final message. It wasn't an apology, not really, more like a confession wrapped in nostalgia. I never meant to lose you. I thought I could step outside of us and still come back, but the door closed before I realized it. Tyler read the message. He didn't reply. Instead, he stood at the edge of a lake an hour outside of town, watching the light ripple across the water. He took a breath, not heavy, not forced, just clean, because some betrayals don't end in explosions. They end in stillness, in choosing yourself, in walking away with your head held high, not because you were unhurt, but because you refused to be broken. And in that quiet ending, Tyler found his beginning,